Hi students. So we are now going to explore animation of our basic transformations, our move, and now we're going to add rotate to the mix. And we are also going to take a look at how animation works with a group, which is what this is here, versus a linked hierarchy of objects, which we will do in a moment. So I've created just a simple tower of a box, a sphere, and a teapot, and I have grouped them together, and so I'm not including that in the tutorial because we've done this several times, so I'm going to ask you to pause the video and create a tower of these three objects on your own and make it into a group. So go ahead and do that now. And so next, we are going to make sure we have the Move tool selected, and we're just going to go and make sure that those basic settings that we went over in the previous tutorial are the way we want it. So we're going to click on our time configuration thingy. We are going to make sure that we are at a custom frame rate of 30 frames per second. And our animation, at least mine says 90 because 90 is what my last project was when I made the previous video, and 3ds Max just left it at that. And so I'm going to leave it at that too. So let's take a moment to remember that if we have a 30 frame per second frame rate and we have 90 frames, that is going to give us 3 seconds of animation from start to finish in our little clip that we have here. All right, so we're going to click OK. We are also going to go into our keyframe filters, and it just so happens, again, since I had 3ds Max open from the previous tutorial, that I had position as the only keyframe that 3ds Max was going to create. I'm going to add rotation to that as well, because we are soon going to be keyframing both of these, the movement of the tower as well as some rotation. So let's say that we wanted to make a short animation of our tower traveling from one edge of the grid to the other, and then when it gets to the end and it stops, it sort of tips over. So let's see what we can do here. So let's go into our set key mode, and since we're at the beginning of our animation and we've put our tower pretty much where we want it, we can hit a plus. And then we can, actually, I'd like to draw attention to the fact, notice how now our keyframe has 2 little bars on it. And that indicates to us that there are 2 different parameters that are now keyframed. Check it out. If I right click, see how if I go to key properties, now we can see that we have a lot going on here. We have the position and rotation of each individual object. Whereas in our previous tutorial, each keyframe only contained information about the object's position. And that's because of what we said over here. So each keyframe we make is going to save a set of information about where the objects are, as well as what their rotation is. And that's a little visual, that little double bar there saying that it's keeping track of both. All right, continuing on. So we're going to go to 2 seconds into our animation, right? So we have our little tower skidding across the floor and coming to a stop at the other end of the grid. And then at this point, we want it to look like it's going to tip over. So let's see. Let's switch over to rotation, and then we go to rotate it. Whoop, rotate in one direction, but really that's not really what we want, is it? Because that just looks like that does not look like it's tipping over. Well, I kind of did this on purpose because this would be a common rookie mistake, is to just get going and get right into it. When you are keyframing animation of one object, it's less likely for this to happen, but as you start to create more complex objects like your snowman, you have to pay attention to, I'm going to Control Z, the location of the gizmo in the object itself. We've been using the gizmo kind of to grab an object and move it, to see, it's basically been our tool for transformation. So if we want to rotate, we grab it to rotate it. One thing we haven't talked a lot about is really the effect of where the gizmo is in the object, and how that affects motion. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to delete these keyframes. So you should do the same. This is, thank goodness for all. We're going to delete both of these keyframes. It's good practice, deleting keyframes and going back and starting again. So let's turn off our keyframing completely for a second, and let's take a look at what we've got going on here. So if we want our object to be able to kind of tip from the bottom and fall forward, we have to actually move the location of the gizmo within our group. And that's something we have not yet done. And some of you may have heard me referring to this as the pivot point a few times over the course of the semester, and that's because when we talk about animation, rather than calling it the gizmo, we talk about the pivot point. And if you think about it, the pivot point is where movement happens around. So if we want to rotate, notice that the point of the pivot is literally where the center of the gizmo. The whole tower pivots around that one center point where it's set to be at the moment. So if we want it to pivot from the bottom, we have to move the pivot point down. So let's do that. Let's make sure first we're in the Move tool, and then we are going to come over to this tab here, Hierarchy tab. And we can see that we have our first object called Pivot, and we have the option to affect Pivot Only. We can drag it down, and I'm going to zoom in so you can actually see what's happening here. I'm not sure how well you can see it, but it's almost like another gizmo gets formed inside of the other one. And that's just basically to show you that you can move the gizmo around. So since we're in the front viewport, we're moving it that way. But in theory, not that we'd want to, we can move over the top viewpoint and set our pivot point wherever, and really you can put it wherever you want it, depending on the effect that you want it to achieve. But we're going to leave it in the center here. All right, done. So now, when we select our transform tools, notice now our rotation guy is right at the bottom. So now we can rotate from the bottom. So the location of the gizmo, in other words, the location of the pivot point of your object, is going to play a huge role in the way your object moves in your scene and the type of control that you're going to have over your scene. Imagine the arm of the snowman and where the pivot point would need to be if you want to be able to make it look like the arm is waving. You wouldn't want your pivot point at the end of the arm, you'd want it at the base of the arm. So moving the pivot point is very important. Okay, so let's go back to what we were going to be doing originally. Now that we have our pivot point down where we want it, we also have our teapot at the beginning of our grid where we want it to start. So let's go ahead and turn our keyframing back on. And we're going to add our first keyframe. Great. So now we'll go to 60 frames in. So first it's going to take the first 2 seconds to move across our scene here. All right, make another keyframe. And then it's going to tip over. So we're going to switch over to rotation. And then we're going to have it rotate down, keyframe it again. So let's see how that looks. Play. Boop. All right. Not super realistic, but there you have it. So this is one of those situations where having it move as a whole group is fine. But say we wanted to have the teapot doing its own thing. Maybe we wanted the teapot to be wobbling around on top of the sphere as the tower moves to make it look like the teapot is trying to balance. This would be a situation where the group would not be the best solution because, as we know, the group behaves like a single unit. So this initial animation where we have one tower of objects all behaving as one, the group works fine. Okay, so let's delete these keyframes. So we will select them, right click them, go to delete key and all, Same thing. I'm going to delete the last one. So what do you think happens if you delete this one first? What's going to be left? This keyframe where it's on its side. So we're going to delete that one first. That way now we're left with the tower being right side up. Okay. Awesome. So now we're going to take our Tower of Chaos and we are going to ungroup it. And now we are going to link our objects together. So if we want our hierarchy to all depend on the cube, we will begin by clicking on our teapot, dragging to the sphere, click the sphere, drag the cube. And there is our hierarchy over there. So we can do a similar animation where we keyframe the location of box. Let's work on that. Bring it over here. Keyframe. So there you go. So maybe we want to add a little realism to this in that the teapot itself, when the box begins to move, we want the teapot to kind of rotate backwards, like it's sort of tipping back because of the movement and momentum. So let's put a keyframe for the initial position. And as the box moves forward, and this is all kind of up to you the way you want this to look, but I'm going to do a little quick lean back there, and then maybe a little wobble forward. Let's see how that looks. So that seemed a little fast, don't you think? So it's like the box barely gets started and the teapot's flying back, so it doesn't look too realistic. So something we can actually do that's really useful, we can click and select those keyframes. We can actually drag them and spread them out a little bit. And this is a really helpful thing to do when you're trying to kind of fine-tune the look of an animation. So that's a little better, right? So again, by creating your keyframes, you can adjust the timing of them to make your motion look different. Okay, so in the next video, we are going to explore doing some additional animation to the other components of our hierarchy. I paused my recording and did a few extra things. You can see I've got some keyframes over here on the right. So in the next video, we will take a look at basically adding to our animation so that when our box comes to a stop, our sphere and our teapot kind of topple off of it. And this is going to kind of show us how having our objects in a hierarchy can be really helpful for one part of the animation, and then we can actually sort of break out of that hierarchy a little bit and animate the other parts of it for the effect that we want, which again is that flexibility that we talked about that linking gives us that grouping does not. So I'm going to stop this video for now, and I will see you in the next one.